What would you risk for $10,000 a day? For Madison Clark, the challenge was simple. Survive alone in the brutal Montana wilderness. The prize? $10,000 for every day she lasted. With minimal supplies and dwindling rations, the crushing weight of solitude and the constant gnaw of hunger became her only companions. Days bled into one another, each sunrise a small victory, each sunset a testament to her will. She was earning a fortune, but losing herself in the process. What started as a reality show challenge quickly became something far more dangerous. By day 9, with her food gone and strength failing, the 26-year-old made a desperate declaration that would push her beyond all limits. She wouldn't quit until she'd earned $1 million. Then everything changed. She accidentally fell from a cliff and became stuck on a tree branch, hungry, weak, and dehydrated. When all hope was lost, an unexpected visitor from the wilderness appeared. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The helicopter blades whirred overhead, kicking up dust and pine needles as Madison Clark stepped onto the forest floor. At 26, she'd never imagined herself here, in the heart of Montana's wilderness, about to embark on the most challenging experience of her life. The reality show's premise was simple: survive alone in the wild for as long as possible, earning $10,000 for each day completed. What wasn't simple was everything else. "Remember," the producer shouted over the helicopter noise, "emergency beacon if you need immediate evacuation. Otherwise, you're on your own." Madison nodded, clutching her minimal supplies. A tarp, some paracord, a knife, basic first aid kit, and enough rations for maybe a week if she stretched them. As the helicopter disappeared over the tree line, the silence that followed was deafening. She was utterly alone. The first order of business was shelter. Madison had watched enough survival shows to know that exposure could kill faster than hunger. She found a cluster of pine trees with low-hanging branches and began gathering materials. Pine needles would serve as insulation, the tarp as a roof. In her scavenging, she discovered something unexpected: a broken piece from what looked like an old playground swing set, probably blown in from some distant campground. The curved metal would make an excellent support beam. By nightfall, she had a rudimentary shelter. It wasn't pretty, but it would keep the rain off. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted. Montana nights, even in early fall, were brutally cold. Madison huddled in her sleeping bag, every strange sound making her heart race. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Day 1 down, she thought. $10,000 earned. The next few days fell into a routine. Morning meant checking her snares, all empty, foraging for edible plants, slim pickings, and improving her shelter. She rationed her food carefully, a few bites of jerky here, a handful of nuts there. Water wasn't a problem. A small stream ran about 100 yards from her camp. But food was becoming an issue. By day 5, Madison had consumed half her rations and caught nothing. The berries she'd found were few and far between. She tried fishing with an improvised spear, but came up empty. Hunger was no longer just an inconvenience. It was a constant, gnawing presence. $50,000, she said aloud on the morning of day 6, needing to hear a human voice, even if it was her own. Almost enough to pay off student loans. But money seemed abstract out here. What mattered was the next meal. The next night survived. She'd found some edible roots and cattail shoots near the stream, but they did little to ease the hunger. Her energy was flagging. Day 9 arrived with an empty food bag. The last of her jerky was gone. Madison sat by her small fire, poking at the coals with a stick. She'd made it this far, $90,000. It was more money than she'd ever seen, but her body was telling her to quit. Her clothes hung loose, her hands shook when she tried to work on her shelter, and dizzy spells came more frequently. That's when she made the declaration that would change everything. $1 million, she announced to the trees, to the sky, to whatever wildlife might be listening. I'm staying until I hit 1 million. 100 days. It was ambitious. It was probably foolish. But Madison had always been stubborn. Her mother used to say she'd argue with a fence post if given the chance. That stubbornness had gotten her through college, through her father's death, through a dozen other challenges. It would get her through this. Day 10 dawned gray and misty. Madison's plan was to explore further from camp, maybe find better foraging grounds or signs of larger game. She'd fashioned a walking stick and set out, following a deer trail that wound up the mountainside. The trail was steep, and in her weakened state, every step took effort. She paused frequently, catching her breath, fighting the lightheadedness that threatened to overwhelm her. Maybe she should turn back. Maybe... The ground gave way. It happened so fast Madison barely had time to scream. One moment she was on solid ground, the next she was falling, branches whipping past her face, rocks scraping her arms. She hit something hard, a tree branch, and instinctively wrapped her arms around it. The branch held, but barely, creaking ominously under her weight. Madison looked down and immediately wished she hadn't. The drop was at least 30 feet onto jagged rocks. Her legs dangled uselessly, and when she tried to pull herself up, her weakened arms simply didn't have the strength. Panic set in. "Help!" she screamed, knowing it was useless. No one was coming. The emergency beacon was back at camp. "Please, somebody." Hours passed. The branch continued to creak. Madison's arms went from aching to numb. She tried everything, swinging her legs to reach the cliff face, shifting her weight to climb higher. But each movement made the branch groan more ominously. Dehydration made her thoughts fuzzy. Maybe this was how it ended. Maybe. A soft sound made her look up. Golden eyes stared down at her from the cliff edge. A bobcat. Madison's heart, already racing, seemed to stop entirely. The cat was beautiful. Tawny fur with dark spots, tufted ears, powerful muscles evident even in its relaxed posture. It watched her with an intensity that was neither hostile nor friendly, just curious. "Please," Madison whispered, not sure what she was asking for. "Please." The bobcat tilted its head, then disappeared from view. Madison felt despair wash over her. Of course it left. Why would it stay? But then she heard movement, not above, but to her right. The bobcat had descended partway down the cliff using a series of small ledges she hadn't noticed. It moved with casual grace, as if gravity were merely a suggestion. It paused on a ledge about 5 feet away and looked at her. Then it looked pointedly at the ledges. Back at her. Back at the ledges. Was it showing her a path? Madison studied where the bobcat had stepped. There, a small outcropping she could maybe reach with her foot if she swung just right. And from there, another ledge and another. A natural staircase she'd been too panicked to see. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay." The first move was the hardest. Letting go with one hand to reach for the cliff face went against every instinct. But the branch was weakening. She could feel it starting to splinter. It was move or fall. She swung her legs, found the first ledge with her foot, tested it. Solid. Now the terrifying part, letting go of the branch. Madison said a prayer to whatever forces had sent the bobcat and pushed off. For a heart-stopping moment, she was neither on the branch nor secure on the ledge. Then her fingers found purchase on the rock face, and she pressed herself against the cliff, breathing hard. The bobcat watched from its perch, patient as stone. Step by step, ledge by ledge, Madison made her way down. Several times she had to stretch further than felt safe, had to trust holds that seemed impossibly small. But each time she looked over, the bobcat was there, golden eyes steady and calm. When she finally reached solid ground, her legs gave out and she collapsed onto the rocky floor. The bobcat descended the rest of the way with liquid grace and approached slowly. Madison held her breath. Wild animals were unpredictable, and she was in no state to defend herself. But the cat simply walked past her, paused, and looked back. "Follow me." The message was as clear as if it had been spoken aloud. Madison struggled to her feet and followed. Every step was agony, but the bobcat kept a steady pace, occasionally pausing to ensure she was still behind. They wound through the forest, following paths Madison would never have found on her own. Just when she thought she couldn't take another step, she heard it, the blessed sound of running water. A creek, wider and deeper than the stream near her camp, curved through a grove of aspens. The bobcat led her to a specific spot where the bank was low and the water pooled in a natural basin. Madison fell to her knees and drank deeply, the cold water like life itself flowing back into her body. When she finally looked up, the bobcat was sitting a few yards away, grooming its paw with studied indifference. But it didn't leave. As the sun began to set, Madison realized she had no idea how to get back to her camp. Everything looked different from this side of the mountain, but the bobcat seemed to have other plans. It rose and walked along the creek bank to where a massive fallen tree created a natural shelter. Beneath it, hidden behind hanging moss and branches, was a den. The bobcat disappeared inside, then emerged and sat, looking at Madison expectantly. "You want me to stay here?" she asked. A slow blink was her answer. Madison gathered what strength she had left and began preparing a shelter near the den. Not too close. She wasn't foolish enough to crowd a wild predator, but close enough that she felt oddly protected. Using branches and the moss that grew abundantly here, she created a bed elevated off the damp ground. As darkness fell, she curled up in her makeshift shelter, hungry but alive. She woke to a soft thud near her head. In the dim dawn light, she saw the bobcat sitting a few feet away. At her feet lay a rabbit, still warm. Madison stared at the offering in disbelief. The bobcat watched her with those inscrutable golden eyes, then turned and padded back to its den. "Thank you," Madison whispered. She'd never cleaned wild game before, but hunger is a powerful teacher. Using her knife and half-remembered YouTube videos, she managed to skin and clean the rabbit. Building a fire took 3 attempts with shaking hands, but finally, she had flames. The smell of cooking meat made her dizzy with anticipation. That rabbit was the best meal of her life. Days passed in this strange new rhythm. Madison built a better shelter near the creek. even constructing a small dock-like platform over the water for washing and filling her water bottle. The bobcat came and went, sometimes disappearing for days, other times lounging near her camp with feline nonchalance. Twice more, it brought her food, another rabbit and once a grouse. She supplemented these gifts with her own foraging, which was more successful here. The creek hosted cattail roots, watercress, and even some freshwater clams. She fashioned better tools, improved her shelter with a raised bed to stay warmer, and slowly felt her strength returning. On day 15, while gathering firewood, Madison found herself talking to the bobcat, who was supervising from a sunny rock. "You know, I had a cat growing up, Mr. Whiskers. Dumbest name ever, but I was 6. She laughed, the sound strange after so much silence. "He used to bring me dead mice. Mom hated it, but I always thought he was trying to take care of me. Guess that's what you're doing, huh?" The bobcat yawned, showing impressive fangs, then went back to dozing. The nights were still brutal. Even with her improved shelter and better nutrition, the cold was a constant enemy. But something had changed. The forest no longer felt hostile. Maybe it was the steady presence of the creek, or the way she'd learned to read the signs of weather in the clouds, or maybe it was the strange companionship of the bobcat. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. On day 18, Madison made a discovery that changed everything. Following the creek upstream in search of better fishing spots, she found where it joined a proper river. Not huge, but substantial. Wide enough that fallen trees created natural bridges, deep enough that she could see fish swimming in the darker pools. "This is it," she told the bobcat, who had accompanied her on the expedition. "This is how I make it to 100 days." She spent day 19 constructing a fish trap, weaving branches together in a design she'd seen in a survival manual years ago. It was crude but functional. By evening, she'd caught 3 decent-sized trout. That night, as she cooked her fish over the fire, Madison did the math. 19 days. $190,000. It was enough to pay off her loans, help her mom with the mortgage, even start that business she'd always dreamed of. But more than that, she'd proven something to herself. She could do hard things. She could survive when everything seemed hopeless. She'd made a friend of the wilderness and earned the trust of one of its most elusive predators. The next morning, day 20, dawned clear and cold. Madison sat by her fire, the bobcat lounging nearby, and held the emergency beacon in her hand. One press, and a helicopter would come. One press, and she'd return to the world of schedules and traffic and electric lights. She looked at the bobcat. "What do you think, friend? Keep going?" The cat stretched luxuriously, then fixed her with that steady golden gaze. And in that look, Madison saw what she'd been missing. The bobcat wasn't her pet or her guardian. It was a wild creature that had chosen, for reasons of its own, to help her. And now it was time for both of them to return to their real lives. "You're right," she said softly. "We've both got places to be." Madison pressed the beacon. The helicopter arrived 2 hours later, the crew astonished at finding her not at her original camp but miles away by the river. As she climbed aboard, Madison looked back one last time. The bobcat sat at the edge of the tree line, watching. "Thank you," she mouthed. The cat blinked once, slowly, then melted back into the forest. The story Madison told upon her return captivated audiences. Not the survival tactics or the physical challenges, but the bond formed between human and wild animal. Critics called it impossible, said she must have been hallucinating from hunger. But Madison knew the truth. She had the scars from her fall, the memory of golden eyes, and a respect for the wild that went bone deep. The $200,000 changed her life in practical ways. No more student debt, a safety net for her family, seed money for an outdoor education program she started for inner-city kids. But the real change was deeper. She'd learned that kindness existed in unexpected places, that connection could transcend species, that sometimes the universe sent exactly what you needed in the form you least expected. 6 months later, Madison returned to Montana. Not for cameras or money, but for closure. She hiked back to the creek, to the fallen tree that had sheltered the den. The area looked different in spring, greener, more alive. She'd brought something with her, a fresh trout, caught that morning from a nearby stream. Madison placed the fish on a flat rock near the den entrance. A gift for a gift. "I don't know if you're still here," she said to the forest, "but thank you for everything." She turned to leave, then stopped. There, at the edge of her vision, a familiar form. The bobcat stood watching her from beside a tree, and Madison's heart swelled. But then movement caught her eye. 2 smaller forms tumbling in the grass behind their mother. Kits. The bobcat had kits. Understanding flooded through Madison. No wonder the cat had helped her, had shared precious food. One mother recognizing another creature in need, extending help across the vast divide between wild and civilized. The bobcat picked up the fish in her mouth, gave Madison one last long look, and disappeared into the underbrush with her babies. Madison hiked out with tears streaming down her face, not of sadness, but of gratitude. She'd come to the wilderness seeking money and found something worth far more. Proof that compassion existed everywhere. That connection was possible between all living things. That sometimes the most profound gifts came from the most unexpected sources. Back in her everyday life, when things got hard, when the world seemed cold and uncaring, Madison would close her eyes and remember. Golden eyes in the forest, a warm rabbit on a cold morning, and the lesson that we're never as alone as we think we are. The wild had taught her that, through the heart of a bobcat who chose to care. And in her outdoor education program, when she took city kids into the woods for the first time, she always ended with the same message. Respect the wild, but don't fear it. You never know where you'll find a friend. Some of the kids would roll their eyes, too cool for sentiment. But sometimes, 1 or 2 would listen with wide eyes, sensing the truth behind the words. And Madison would smile, knowing that someday, when they needed it most, they'd remember. Kindness exists everywhere, even in the heart of a predator, even in the depths of the wilderness, even when all seems lost. The forest keeps its own counsel, guards its own secrets. But sometimes, just sometimes, it opens its heart and shows us that we're all connected. Predator and prey, wild and tame, human and animal. All of us just trying to survive, all of us capable of extraordinary grace. And somewhere in Montana, a bobcat raises her kits with the bounty of the land and perhaps, on quiet nights, remembers the strange 2-legged creature who shared her territory for a time. 2 mothers, 2 survivors, bound forever by a moment of mutual recognition and inexplicable kindness. That's the real treasure Madison found in the wilderness. Not the money, though that helped, but the proof that miracles still happened, that angels sometimes wore fur and fangs, and that when you thought you were most alone, that's when the universe might send exactly what you needed. Even if it came on 4 paws, with golden eyes and a wild, wild heart. On a sunset evening, Dr. Emily Carter was driving home after a long day at the veterinary clinic. As she looked at the roadside, she noticed something unusual: a small shape lying still near the edge. Concerned, Emily pulled over and stepped cautiously toward the figure. Her heart skipped when she saw it was a bobcat, clearly injured and breathing shallowly. She approached slowly, expecting the animal to hiss or retreat, but the bobcat merely watched her with exhausted, pleading eyes. Against all odds, this fierce predator accepted Emily's help without resistance, sparking a unique bond between human and wild animal. Little did Emily know, this encounter was only the beginning of an incredible journey filled with unexpected returns, heartwarming surprises, and a connection between two souls that defied the boundaries of species. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The October sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the winding mountain road that cut through the dense forest of northern Arizona. Dr. Emily Carter gripped her steering wheel, her knuckles white with exhaustion after a 12-hour shift at the Pinewood Veterinary Clinic. The day had been particularly challenging. 3 emergency surgeries, a litter of abandoned puppies, and the heartbreaking task of helping the Johnsons say goodbye to their 15-year-old golden retriever, Rusty. At 42, Emily had been a veterinarian for nearly 2 decades, but days like this still drained her completely. She'd moved to this small mountain town 5 years ago after her divorce, seeking solace in the quieter pace and the majesty of nature that surrounded the community. Her small practice had quickly become essential to the town and neighboring rural areas, where large animal vets were scarce and wildlife encounters common. As she rounded a sharp bend, the setting sun momentarily blinded her. Emily slowed her Subaru and reached for her sunglasses. That's when she spotted it. An unusual shape on the roadside shoulder, partially hidden by tall grasses. Something about the form didn't register as roadkill or debris. Her veterinarian's instincts kicked in, and Emily pulled over, gravel crunching beneath her tires. "Please don't be another abandoned pet," she whispered to herself as she grabbed the emergency kit she always kept in her vehicle. The rural roads were too often the dumping grounds for unwanted animals, a reality that never failed to break her heart. Emily approached cautiously, her boots crunching on the gravel. As she drew closer, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a domestic animal at all, but a bobcat, a young adult female from what she could tell, lying motionless on her side. The wild cat's tawny fur was matted with blood along one flank, and her hind leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Emily's trained eye immediately recognized the signs of a vehicle collision. She hesitated, keeping a safe distance. Bobcats, even injured ones, could be dangerous. In her years of practice, Emily had treated various wildlife, mostly birds of prey, the occasional deer fawn, and once a black bear cub, but always with proper equipment and assistance. This was different. She was alone on a deserted road with a wild predator. "Hey there," she called softly, expecting the animal to hiss or attempt to flee. But the bobcat merely lifted her head slightly, amber eyes fixing on Emily with what seemed like equal parts fear and exhaustion. The animal's sides heaved with labored breathing, and Emily knew immediately that without intervention, this magnificent creature wouldn't survive the night. Crouching lower, Emily moved slowly closer, continuing to speak in gentle tones. "You're in pretty rough shape, aren't you?" she murmured. "I want to help, if you'll let me." To her amazement, the bobcat didn't struggle as Emily cautiously extended her hand, allowing the wild animal to catch her scent. There was something in those amber eyes, a flicker of understanding, perhaps, or simply the resignation of a creature too injured to fight. Whatever the reason, the bobcat remained still, watching Emily with an intensity that felt almost human in its awareness. "You're safe now, sweetheart," Emily whispered, the endearment slipping out naturally despite the wildness of her patient. "I'm going to help you." With careful movements, Emily returned to her car for a thick blanket she kept for emergencies. Back at the bobcat's side, she gently slid the blanket beneath and around the injured animal, creating a makeshift stretcher and restraint simultaneously. The bobcat flinched as the fabric touched her wounds, but otherwise remained surprisingly docile. "That's it," Emily encouraged, securing the blanket around the cat without restricting her breathing. "You're doing great." As she lifted the bundle, Emily was struck by how light the bobcat felt, clearly underfed and dehydrated, possibly for days before the injury. The thought of the animal suffering alone by the roadside sent a surge of protective anger through her. Carefully placing the wrapped bobcat on the back seat of her Subaru, Emily's mind raced through her options. The nearest wildlife rehabilitation center was over 4 hours away in Flagstaff. With night falling and the bobcat's condition critical, Emily made a quick decision. She would take the cat to her own home, where she had converted a small outbuilding into a treatment space for after-hours emergencies. It wasn't ideal for wildlife, but it was the bobcat's best chance at survival. "Hang in there," she said, glancing back at her unlikely passenger as she pulled onto the road. "We'll be home soon." Emily's property sat on 5 acres at the edge of town, backing up to National Forest land. The small A-frame cabin had been a fixer-upper when she purchased it, but the isolation and surrounding wilderness had been worth the work. The converted shed that served as her emergency clinic was equipped with basic surgical supplies, medication, and a few cages of various sizes. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, Emily examined the bobcat more thoroughly. The animal was remarkably calm, likely due to shock and weakness rather than trust, Emily reminded herself. The injuries were severe. A compound fracture of the right hind leg, multiple lacerations, and signs of internal bleeding, all consistent with a high-speed vehicle impact. "You're lucky to be alive," Emily told the bobcat as she prepared a mild sedative. She needed the cat unconscious to properly treat the wounds and set the broken leg. As she injected the medication, the bobcat's eyes remained fixed on her, and Emily felt an unexpected connection with the wild creature. "I'm going to call you Hope," she decided aloud, "because that's what you need right now." Working quickly once Hope was sedated, Emily cleaned the wounds, set and splinted the broken leg, and administered antibiotics and fluids. Throughout the delicate procedure, she found herself talking to the unconscious animal as if she were one of her regular patients. "You've got a long road ahead, Hope, but I think you've got fight in you. I can see it in those eyes." When the treatment was complete, Emily settled Hope into a large dog crate lined with soft blankets. She placed the crate in the quietest corner of the outbuilding, dimmed the lights, and reluctantly left to shower off the day's accumulated grime. Before turning in for the night, she checked on Hope once more, finding the bobcat awake but groggy, amber eyes tracking her movements. "Rest now," Emily told her. "I'll be back in the morning." Sleep came fitfully that night as Emily's mind churned with concerns about her unusual patient. She knew that taking in wildlife, especially a predator like a bobcat, carried risks, both to herself and to the animal. Wildlife belonged in the wild, and prolonged human contact could compromise Hope's ability to survive once released. Yet the alternative had been certain death by the roadside. Just until she's stable, Emily promised herself in the darkness. Then I'll contact the rehabilitation center. When dawn broke, Emily rushed to the outbuilding, half expecting to find Hope had succumbed to her injuries overnight. Instead, she found the Bobcat alert, sitting upright despite her splinted leg. Hope watched Emily enter with that same intense gaze, ears perked forward with interest rather than flattened in fear. "Well, good morning to you too," Emily said, relief evident in her voice. "Looks like you made it through the night." Over the next several days, Hope continued to defy expectations. The internal bleeding resolved, her wounds began healing without infection, and she ate the raw meat Emily provided with surprising vigor. Most remarkable was her demeanor. While never fully relaxed, Hope seemed to accept Emily's presence, watching her work with curious attention rather than wild fear. Emily maintained phone consultations with a wildlife specialist from the Flagstaff Rehabilitation Center, who expressed both admiration for Emily's intervention and concern about Hope's extended contact with humans. "Bobcats aren't like domestic felines," Dr. Martinez warned over the phone. "Even hand-raised ones retain their wild instincts. You need to minimize contact and avoid bonding behaviors." "I understand," Emily assured him, though even as she spoke, she was watching Hope roll a small rubber ball around her cage, a therapeutic exercise she'd introduced to keep the Bobcat's mind stimulated during recovery. "I'm being careful." But the truth was more complicated. Despite her professional knowledge and best intentions, Emily found herself increasingly drawn to the wild cat. She extended her morning and evening check-ins, sitting quietly near Hope's cage, sometimes reading aloud from whatever book currently occupied her nightstand. Hope seemed to enjoy the sound of her voice, often settling into a relaxed position, eyes half closed in contentment. 2 weeks into Hope's recovery, Emily made a breakthrough. While changing the bedding in Hope's cage, a task that usually required moving the Bobcat to a temporary enclosure, Hope didn't retreat to the back of the crate as usual. Instead, she cautiously extended her neck, rough tongue darting out to rasp against Emily's wrist. Emily froze, heart hammering. The gesture wasn't aggression, but something akin to affection, the Bobcat's version of trust. Tears sprung unexpectedly to Emily's eyes. "Hey there," she whispered, remaining perfectly still. Hope maintained eye contact, then deliberately blinked slowly, a sign of trust among felines. Emily blinked back, honoring the communication. That evening, Emily found herself confessing to her closest friend, Michael Thompson, the town's only family physician and her occasional dinner companion. "I know it's ridiculous," she said as they sat on her porch, the outbuilding visible in the gathering dusk. "She's a wild animal, not a pet. But there's something about her, Mike. Something almost knowing." Michael, a tall, soft-spoken man with kind eyes and prematurely silver hair, didn't immediately dismiss her feelings. As a doctor in a small town, he too had formed unexpected connections with patients over the years. "Nature has its mysteries," he offered, sipping his coffee. "Maybe you needed each other at exactly this moment." Emily appreciated his understanding, but she couldn't shake the nagging concern about Hope's future. The splint would come off soon, and while the Bobcat was healing remarkably well, returning her to the wild posed challenges. Would she be able to hunt effectively? Had their bond compromised her wild instincts? The rehabilitation center had space opening in a month. Should she transfer Hope there for final preparation before release? "Whatever you decide," Michael said, sensing her internal struggle. "You've already given her a second chance. That's more than she would have had without you. As weeks passed, Hope grew stronger. Emily moved her to a larger enclosure in the backyard, offering the Bobcat more space and exposure to natural sights, sounds, and smells. From her kitchen window, Emily could watch Hope navigating her expanded territory, testing her healing leg, stretching her powerful body along the branches Emily had installed, and tracking the movements of birds and squirrels beyond the mesh walls. Emily began the delicate process of distancing herself, reducing direct contact and observation time, though she found herself lingering by the window more often than she should. Hope needed to remember her wild nature before release, and Emily needed to prepare herself for the inevitable goodbye. The morning Emily removed Hope's splint was bittersweet. The fracture had healed beautifully, and the Bobcat immediately began testing her newly freed limb, moving with increasing confidence around her enclosure. "You'll be ready soon," Emily told her, maintaining a professional distance even as her heart constricted. Hope watched her with those intelligent amber eyes, tail twitching, perhaps in acknowledgement, perhaps merely in feline response. Dr. Martinez from the Rehabilitation Center had suggested a location for release. A protected wilderness area about 40 miles from town, with a healthy bobcat population but sufficient territory and prey to support a newcomer. Emily drove out to scout the location one weekend, finding a secluded clearing near a stream that seemed perfect. Plenty of cover, signs of rabbit and rodent activity, and far enough from roads and human habitation to give Hope her best chance. The day of release arrived sooner than Emily felt ready for. The late November morning dawned clear and cold, the mountains dusted with the first snow of the season. Hope seemed to sense something different as Emily approached her enclosure with the animal carrier. "Today's the day, beautiful girl," Emily said softly, opening the enclosure door. "Time for you to go home." To her surprise, Hope entered the carrier willingly, settling inside with a dignified poise that struck Emily as almost ceremonial. The drive to the release site was quiet, Emily occasionally glancing at the carrier in her passenger seat, catching glimpses of Hope's face through the grate. At the clearing, Emily set the carrier down in the shelter of a large pine tree and opened the door. She stepped back, giving Hope space to emerge on her own terms. Long minutes passed, the autumn forest quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves and distant bird calls. Finally, Hope appeared at the carrier opening, her body low and cautious. She paused, scenting the air, taking in her new surroundings. Then, unexpectedly, she turned to look directly at Emily, holding her gaze for a long, charged moment. "Go on," Emily encouraged, her voice thick with emotion. "This is where you belong." As if understanding, Hope turned away and moved with increasing confidence toward the forest edge. At the tree line, she paused once more, looking back over her shoulder. Then, with a fluid motion that showcased her restored health and natural grace, the Bobcat disappeared into the undergrowth. Emily stood alone in the clearing for a long time afterward, tears streaming freely down her face. The emptiness she felt surprised her with its intensity. It wasn't just about Hope. It was about all the connections and partings in her life. Her failed marriage, her decision to leave her busy urban practice, the patience she'd lost and saved over the years. "Goodbye, Hope," she finally whispered to the silent forest. "Be wild. Be free." Winter settled over the mountain town, bringing short days and long nights filled with snow and solitude. Emily threw herself into her work at the clinic, grateful for the distraction of routine appointments and occasional emergencies. She avoided driving past the spot where she'd found Hope, taking the longer route into town even on days when the snow made the drive treacherous. Michael noticed the change in her during their now weekly dinners. "You did the right thing," he assured her one evening as they sat before the fireplace in her cabin, the wind howling outside. "She was never meant to be a pet." "I know," Emily said, staring into the flames. "I just miss her. Ridiculous, isn't it? To miss a wild animal that was only in my life for a few weeks?" "Not ridiculous at all," Michael replied, his hand finding hers in a gesture that had become increasingly common between them. "She touched something in you. Something important." As January gave way to February, Emily began to find her equilibrium again. She still thought of Hope daily, wondering how the Bobcat was faring in the wilderness, but the sharp pain of separation had dulled to a bittersweet memory. Life continued its steady rhythm, and Emily found unexpected joy in the deepening of her relationship with Michael, who had become a constant presence in her once solitary life. Then, on a bright morning in early March, everything changed. Emily was enjoying her coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Movement at the forest edge caught her eye. Probably a deer, she thought, or perhaps a coyote hunting for breakfast in the meadow behind her property. But as the figure emerged from the tree line, Emily's coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the wooden planks. It wasn't a deer or a coyote. It was a bobcat, moving with deliberate purpose across the snow-covered ground directly toward her house. "Hope?" Emily whispered, hardly daring to believe her eyes. The bobcat paused at the sound of her voice, head tilting in a gesture so familiar it made Emily's heart constrict. Then the animal continued forward, and Emily could see what she hadn't noticed at first. The bobcat was moving awkwardly, her gait uneven and labored. Emily stepped off the porch into the snow, forgetting her slippers as concern overrode all other considerations. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she called softly, extending a gentle hand as the bobcat approached. Hope, for it was undeniably her, the unique pattern of spots on her fur unmistakable, stopped a few feet away, amber eyes fixed on Emily with that same intense gaze. Then, with a small sound somewhere between a chirp and a mew, she closed the remaining distance and pressed her head against Emily's outstretched hand. The trust in that gesture brought tears to Emily's eyes. Hope had come back, traversing miles of wilderness to find her again, and she was clearly in distress, thinner than she should be, with something off about her movement that went beyond the healed leg injury. "Let me help you," Emily said, kneeling in the snow. To her amazement, Hope allowed herself to be gathered up, her body surprisingly docile in Emily's arms. As Emily carried the bobcat toward the house, she felt a strange vibration against her chest. Hope was purring, a sound Emily had never heard from her during her recovery. Inside, Emily settled Hope on a blanket near the fireplace, quickly examining her for injuries. The previously broken leg seemed fine, but Hope's abdomen was distended in a way that suddenly made perfect sense to Emily's trained eye. "Oh," she breathed, sitting back on her heels. "You're pregnant." Hope watched her with those knowing eyes, then curled into a more comfortable position on the blanket, clearly settling in. The message couldn't have been clearer had the bobcat spoken aloud. She had chosen Emily's home as her safe place to give birth. Emily called the clinic immediately, canceling her appointments for the day. Then she phoned Michael, her voice trembling with excitement and concern as she explained the situation. "She came back to me, Mike. She's going to have kittens." "I'll be right over," he said without hesitation. While waiting for Michael to arrive, Emily prepared her spare bedroom, creating a dark, quiet space with plenty of soft bedding, an improvised den for Hope to deliver her kittens in safety. She coaxed the Bobcat into the room, relieved when Hope seemed to approve of the arrangement, investigating the space before settling into the nest of blankets with a contented rumble. Michael arrived as Emily was setting out water and fresh meat for Hope. His expression as Emily led him to the doorway of the makeshift den was one of wonder mixed with professional concern. "She came all this way to find you," he marveled, keeping his voice low as they observed Hope from a respectful distance. "That's remarkable." "What do I do?" Emily asked, torn between veterinary knowledge and the unprecedented nature of the situation. The Wildlife Center would say to re-trap her and release her elsewhere, away from human contact. Michael considered this, then shook his head slowly. "She made a choice, Emily. She chose you as her safe haven. That has to count for something." Throughout the day, Emily monitored Hope from a distance, providing food and water, but otherwise giving the Bobcat space to prepare for what was coming. By nightfall, it was clear that labor had begun. Hope became restless, repositioning frequently and occasionally emitting soft vocalizations. Emily kept a night-long vigil, sitting on the floor outside the bedroom, dozing intermittently but waking at every sound. Michael stayed too, his steady presence a comfort as Emily navigated this uncharted territory between wild and tame, professional and personal. Just before dawn, the distinct, high-pitched mewling of newborn kittens filled the quiet house. Emily exchanged a look of pure joy with Michael, then cautiously peered into the room. Hope lay curled around 5 tiny spotted bundles, each no larger than Emily's palm. The Bobcat met Emily's gaze calmly, then deliberately lowered her head to continue grooming her offspring. "5 beautiful babies," Emily whispered, retreating to give the new family space. "She did it." In the kitchen, Michael put his arms around Emily, both of them overwhelmed by the miracle they'd witnessed. "What happens now?" he asked gently. Emily leaned into his embrace, suddenly exhausted but filled with a profound sense of purpose. "Now we help her raise them strong enough for the wild," she said with certainty. "They're bobcats, not house cats. They belong out there eventually." "Together?" Michael said. It wasn't a question. Emily looked up at him, seeing in his expression the same commitment that had guided her own choices these past months. "Together," she agreed. The weeks that followed took on a dreamlike quality. Emily converted her guest room into a wildlife nursery, providing Hope with a safe space to nurse and care for her growing kittens while minimizing human contact that might interfere with their natural development. She consulted extensively with wildlife experts, meticulously documenting the kitten's growth and behavior patterns for future reference in wildlife veterinary care. The Bobcat kittens, 3 females and 2 males, grew rapidly under their mother's attentive care. Hope proved to be an excellent mother, teaching her offspring the fundamentals of Bobcat behavior even within the confines of Emily's home. Emily and Michael watched in fascination as she demonstrated stalking techniques, using toys Emily provided to mimic natural prey. As spring advanced, Emily began the process of gradually transitioning the Bobcat family to an outdoor enclosure, larger and more natural than Hope's previous recovery space. The kittens explored their expanded world with boundless energy, climbing, pouncing, and honing the skills they would need for survival in the wild. Emily was careful to maintain professional distance from the kittens, never handling them directly or allowing them to associate humans with food or comfort. Only Hope continued to accept Emily's presence, occasionally approaching for brief moments of connection that felt increasingly like communication between equals rather than human and wild animal. "It's almost time, isn't it?" Michael asked one evening in late May as they watched the Bobcat family from a distance. The kittens had grown remarkably, their spotted coats gleaming with health, their movements showing the coordination and strength they would need to survive. Emily nodded, a familiar mixture of pride and sadness welling up. "Hope knows it too. I can see it in how she's pushing them to be more independent." The release site had already been selected, a remote area deeper in the national forest, with plentiful prey and natural denning options, far from roads or human habitation. Emily had monitored the area for weeks, ensuring it wasn't already claimed by another Bobcat family, and that it offered the best possible start for Hope and her offspring. On a perfect June morning, with wildflowers dotting the meadows and birdsong filling the air, Emily and Michael loaded the Bobcat family into separate carriers for the journey. Hope entered hers willingly, those knowing amber eyes holding Emily's gaze in what felt remarkably like understanding. The kittens, now nearly the size of small house cats, were more reluctant, having known nothing but the safety of Emily's property. But eventually, all were secured for transport. The drive was quiet, Emily occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror at Michael, who had insisted on accompanying her for this final chapter of the journey. "You've done something extraordinary," he told her as they parked at the trailhead and prepared to carry the crates the final half-mile to the release site. "You saved not just one life, but 6. "She saved me too," Emily replied softly, realizing the truth of it as she spoke. "I was just going through the motions before Hope. She reminded me why I became a vet in the first place." The clearing they'd chosen was perfect, a sunlit space surrounded by dense forest, with a small stream nearby and ample evidence of rabbit and squirrel activity. Emily and Michael set the carriers in a row, doors facing the forest, and retreated to the edge of the clearing to give the Bobcats space for their return to the wild. One by one, they opened the carriers remotely using long cords attached to the doors. The kittens emerged cautiously, immediately clustering together, their wild instincts clearly kicking in as they encountered the smells and sounds of true wilderness for the first time. Hope was the last to appear, her exit from the carrier deliberate and dignified. She surveyed the area, visibly scenting the air, then moved to join her kittens. For several long minutes, the Bobcat family remained in the clearing, the kittens gradually growing bolder in their exploration while Hope maintained a watchful presence. Then, with a chirping sound that carried clearly across the clearing, Hope gathered her offspring with apparent signals that needed no human interpretation. The wildcats moved as a unit toward the forest edge, pausing at the tree line. Hope turned, her amber gaze finding Emily across the distance. For a breathtaking moment, their eyes locked in a connection that transcended the boundaries between wild and human. Then, with a flick of her tufted ears that Emily chose to interpret as farewell, Hope led her family into the shadows of the forest and disappeared from view. Emily stood motionless, tears streaming down her face, Michael's arm around her shoulders providing silent support. The emptiness she felt was real, but different from before. Not a hollow loss, but a fullness of purpose fulfilled. "Do you think we'll ever see them again?" Michael asked softly. Emily wiped her tears, smiling through the bittersweet ache. "No," she said with certainty. "And that's exactly as it should be. They belong to the wild now." As they gathered the empty carriers and began the hike back to their vehicle, Emily felt a curious lightness in her heart. Hope had come into her life when both of them needed healing, And through that unexpected connection, Emily had found a renewed sense of purpose in her work and a deeper appreciation for the delicate balance between humans and the natural world. Back in town, life gradually settled into new rhythms. Emily expanded her practice to include more wildlife cases, working closely with regional conservation groups to improve rehabilitation protocols for injured wild animals. She and Michael continued to deepen their relationship, finding in each other the companionship and understanding that complemented their independent spirits. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sunset painted the mountains in the same golden hues as a bobcat's eyes, Emily would think of Hope and her kittens, imagining them moving through the wilderness, wild and free, yet carrying with them the invisible thread of connection that had changed all their lives.